Directors for A Greater Applegate for two years and some change. And when I joined it, I conceived of it in my mind as like it should function as a regenerative chamber of commerce of sorts, because we've got 20,000 people out here in the Applegate Valley and no chamber of commerce. You look at the town of Ashland, which is 20,000 people, and they have a robust chamber of commerce with 4 full-time staff and a board of directors of 16 people. And so, you know, whereas out here, we really don't have much representation. The Josephine County and Jackson County largely just kind of, besides the schools and the library, the roads, ignore us. And in many ways, I would say A Greater Applegate does serve that function, and things like this, the, you know, non-book lending features of the library. So I prepared a little bit of a talk around that, but maybe before we get into it, maybe we'll just go around and introduce ourselves, and Kenny, you can start this one.
So, I'm Rosalind Donald, and I'm the business librarian for Jackson County Library System. And yes, this is part of Jackson County Library System. So I'm kind of a subject specialist. I help people reach their economic goals, whether that's through starting a business, getting a better job, starting a nonprofit, just assessing the business situation. Here, I do a lot of sample business plans, market research reports, but also like teaching people to write a resume. So that's the kind of thing that I do. And I came up with this idea and got a grant from the Oregon Community Foundation to do it. I've been pretty happy, although this is the last one, unfortunately. So if you're interested in hearing more about what a business librarian does, because I will go on until you feign death, but I promise I'll stop before that, let me know.
My name is Julianne Cook. I don't have a career. I just love to do hobbies. I love to craft, and my favorite hobby is gardening. And I hope to have that be a business one day, once I can buy property and make something out of it. So, but no career right now.
Thanks.
I'm Mary, and we have a place out past Yale Creek where the road turns to dirt. And we're sort of figuring out what niche we can fill with our property. We've got an LLC with an umbrella name of Too Far. And we're brainstorming Too Far Timber, Too Far Trails, Too Far, I mean, there's a lot of ways we can go. So I'm not sure what the need is, where we should aim our efforts.
Are you new here?
Fairly new, yeah. We've been here 2.5 years. Really a year and a half in the house that needed a lot of work.
I'm Thalia Truesdale, and I'm a weaver and a piano teacher. There you are. Oh, tonight I'm a candle maker.
Yeah, I'm Noel, and my family runs a business selling seeds and online education around homesteading for the past few years now.
I'm Jeff. I'm the business network manager for A Greater Applegate. So my role is to support businesses in our valley. And I got to meet with a local business this morning that needs capital to make their next moves, and just talked with them. And we're meeting with the Southern Oregon Regional Economic Development Group this week to see what avenues they might explore to get their money. So, but all these different efforts to support businesses and entrepreneurs in the valley, that's part of what we do. So, nice to meet you all.
Awesome, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Rosalind, I might need your help turning this on.
Sorry.
I tried to push the
Does
appropriate buttons, but
hand press
Speak to
flowers,
it.
or just dry them?
Yeah.
This is the wrong.
She mostly
Okay.
does them.
Does she
She has pressed,
Oh, of course
but
there's-
it's not her main thing.
Of course
is
there's
like,
3 remotes and
flower
only one of
arrangements
them
and
works.
bits.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
She has any pressed flowers right now?
Let's see
She
here.
I have a few.
Because
Like
I just started
source.
making candles,
Yeah.
expecting to make 50
Oh,
flowers.
wow.
Try this
I
one.
do not have nearly flowers. I forgot that I
Bingo.
completely
There we go.
devoided
Thank
my
you so much.
collection.
Sure.
Well,
4 years ago during the pandemic, because everything's getting more.
I've met a few of you, but for those of you that I'm unfamiliar with, my name's Don Tipping, and I've lived here in the Applegate for the past 29 years, where I had 7 Seeds Farm. I started back then. And then about 15 years ago, I started Siskiyou Seeds, which is a organic seed company, and we have about 750 varieties of open pollinated vegetables, flowers, herbs, and small grains. And then we also have a few hundred fruit trees and a small flock of sheep and do educational programs, mainly on permaculture and seeds, but I also teach more broadly throughout the West Coast on permaculture and seeds. And as I move forward, you know, as you're like mentioned, you're in the inquiry of like what to do with the land and the business. I was talking with one of my coworkers today about being a producer, the value of being a producer, actually growing things, you know, that we have things that we produce. And, you know, really, in many ways, those involved in the timber industry or mining, or I would say education more broadly, is also in the world of producing, and obviously arts and crafts, you know, actually making things. Whereas so much of our economy nowadays is overly leveraged in this knowledge-based work. All these things that aren't actually making anything, but just adding value, if you will. So that's an important inquiry, and kind of going to take us on a little journey. I don't have too many slides today, but in permaculture we say we design from patterns to details. So look at the broader patterns here in the Applegate, and you can see for the last 150 years, more or less, it's been a resource-based economy. We've gone through many cycles of a boom and bust economy, and I've written an essay I put up on Medium and Substack that I say, how do we, the title is, how do we evolve from a pioneer mindset of how we're inhabiting the ecosystem, because we went from fur trapping to gold mining to the timber industry to ranching, and then you can see like lower in the Rogue Valley was pears for a long time, and that's now in steep decline. And then wineries, that's a decline, I would argue. And then the cannabis industry already did its boom and bust cycle, and now we can see with this new rider, we'll see how it's implemented, where they're banning the cultivation and distribution of hemp CBD products. That's going to be a huge economic blow to our valley. But that's what happens when you don't have a diversified economy, as you're overly, and the whole West Coast is littered with these, you know, boom and bust towns that we can see where they focus too much on one thing. Whereas back to that idea of permaculture, you know, considering designing from patterns to details. You know, so we have 20,000 people here. Everybody that lives here probably has a phone, probably has a car, probably has a home, uses, you know, maybe half of them use firewood. You know, you can run down the list. They buy groceries, they want internet, you know, they might, maybe half of them have kids that are participating in schools, using libraries, other services. You know, what are those going from the larger patterns down to the details? So, you know, the previous classes I looked at, you know, how to design a business and then marketing and some of that idea. And here it's more looking at how are, I guess the inquiry is, those of us who already have businesses that are already established, how can we work together to support a fertile ecosystem in which cottage industry businesses can sprout and flourish? And those of us that are already here, how can that be supported? And I know for myself, having moved here in late 1996, that there were many elder people that, without me seeking them out, sought me out and said, hey, I heard you're starting a farm. Could you use some farmland? Could you use some aluminum irrigation pipe? Have you ever considered growing seeds for this thing? And they wanted to see new, fresh blood come in, and they didn't see it as competition. And I think in many ways that still occurs, but as we enter a time where I'm pretty convinced we're entering a time of economic contraction, and we're gonna have to get more creative about how to thrive as a community. And so that's, you know, this idea of regenerative. I'm sorry the resolution isn't all that great on it, but the idea is we start with the external environment, economic, political, technological, knowledge, social, and then we go into the extended, the customers, suppliers, partners, assets and liabilities, like you were addressing financial capital, how do we fund businesses, and system and processes down to, action. Another way that we look at regenerative is like a circular flow, raw materials, design, production, distribution, consumption. In what ways are there synergies where we could work together with others? I look at the herb farm out where I live is the largest employer in Josephine County. Most people don't know that.
Wow.
Yeah, and pretty much all their employees come from out of the Williams Valley because because I think in large part because of the cannabis economy. A lot of people don't want a Monday through Friday 9-to-5 kind of job. So we see all these people that are employed there, and I think we've lost a unique opportunity there in that they just secured land in Grants Pass area because it was more efficient for them to do business out there. So we're losing some of the economic opportunity right in our watershed because we lacked the infrastructure or the imagination to capitalize on those synergies. Similarly, what other large businesses are out here? There's the Southern Oregon Viticultural Society, works together somewhat, but I know from being part of the AGA, we have almost no communication with them.
Well, there's an Applegate Valley Members Association.
Yeah.
So among those, there's pretty good communication.
Yeah, and I've talked to Joe Janae about this, and I know he's on the board of that. But just how do we get in that place? And as I did a little bit of homework about how chambers of commerce worked, another like pattern understanding thing is like when we get into whole systems design, that's another way of phrasing this patterns to detail mindset. And I've used this slide in a few other things, but I think it is always important to go back to first principles and think about, I won't get into the granular parts, but we have the social element, the political element, economic, ecological, and cultural, and those work together. And I think we will always have to be our own advocate out here in the Applegate because, Grants Pass is focusing on Grants Pass, and Jacksonville and Medford and Ashland are focusing on themselves. They pretty much don't even think about the Applegate, except perhaps a nice place to go on a Sunday afternoon to go wine tasting or go to the lodge or something, or go fishing or hiking. So there's another term in permaculture, which is to integrate rather than segregate. So rather than these are disparate communities, look at pretty much the Applegate goes from Jacksonville to Murphy, all the way to Grants Pass, really. And so what are the constituents of that, and how do we integrate that? Years ago, I remember some of us brainstormed, why don't we have like a shuttle that runs Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and and helps people do their errands? Or the other things like that would serve the needs that pretty much everyone out here has. But instead, we're still on the personal car mindset. So this is another image from the Permaculture Designer's Manual. And if you're not familiar with permaculture, it was started really as a response in the 70s to the oil embargo in 1974 when OPEC cut us off, basically. And people began to really question our relationship with petroleum more deeply. So permaculture arose out of Tasmania and Australia, not so much as a gardening technique, but as a toolbox to hold the tools of sustainable culture. And that's my favorite explanation for it. So you can have a permaculture auto repair business. You could have a permaculture veterinarian clinic. Like, it doesn't have to look like a garden, but this image obviously is an agrarian, homestead one. And so we can see here is not integrated, even though I would say it's a pretty awesome example, but there's a lot of opportunities that are just lost here. Whereas here's what it looks like when it's integrated. And there's just a lot more diversity, a lot more productivity. And you can see, I don't know if you can see the font here, Earth Bank. And I think that's one of the key things. And as one of my mentors and colleagues, Catherine Austin Fitz, has repeated many times, is you're not going to change anything until you change the way money works. And I think the whole world is about to learn a really important lesson about
So
this.
what does that say?
Earth
Earth
Bank.
Bank, oh, okay.
And so I'm gonna come back around to this in terms of like what, how are we using money? Because pretty much every time we use money, we're losing money in the current paradigm. So, we wanna move from this where the elements aren't integrated, they're segregated. You got the orchard, the chicken area, the sheep area, the house, And I would even say, this is doing better than 99% of the people here in the Applegate. They're doing some rainwater catchment and they're growing food. But here, how, everything's gardening. There's a fruit stand, there's a goat tethered, next to beehives, controlling brush on the side of the road. And in permaculture, another principle we say is the theoretical yield of a system is unlimited. The only limitation is the imagination of the designer. And so while we may look at it like, we're the victims of this economic system or this political system or this current time, whereas I look at it as there are so many resources and people that are looking for a job and opportunity. The key is more the orchestration of the whole thing. And farmer rancher Joel Salatin talks about it. He's like, I'm not really a farmer, I'm just the orchestrator. I'm the conductor of the orchestra of nature. You move the sheep over here and you move the chickens over here and all of a sudden everything's happening just right. But if you have too many sheep over here, you're creating a problem. And so I'm again moving in this, kind of from the patterns to detail mindset. And this quote is from my friend Penny Livingston, who actually started the Regenerative Design Institute down in Bolinas, California. And I heard this about 25 years ago, back when sustainability was the buzzword. That's what we were aiming for. And she pointed out that sustainability is merely the midpoint between destruction and regeneration. Like in my view, we don't really want to sustain this current paradigm. We want to evolve it to one that is integrating all the resources and potential benefits that exist when you have 20,000 people living in an area. So that's kind of the guiding, and I hope this is a little brainstorm I did today. What does a regenerative chamber of commerce look like? And some of these I just pulled right from a traditional chamber of commerce by looking at the Jacksonville, Medford, and Grants Pass and Ashland Chamber of Commerce. It's a local business development group. It's a cheerleader for local businesses and nonprofits. Engage in the community. Like in Jacksonville, they're going to do these various holiday things, whether it's all the Christmas decorations or various parades and the carriage rides. Develop business relationships, getting businesses to engage with one another. Increase the visibility of the businesses in the region. Also and then these are the ones that I added, that I didn't really see so much in the traditional ones. We cross-promote one another's businesses. Mm-hmm. And AGA is already really doing that in terms of like, hey, we did this event, here's our partners, there's the Applegate Connect. And even this whole event series with the library is a way to uplift the businesses.
They're doing all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, it was quite an interesting thing. I was like, because Megan, who's the executive director for A Greater Applegate, has been like, Don, can you come up with a definition? I was like, well, we're already doing it. It's just claiming it.
Right.
And I think sometimes when you're too cloistered in the nonprofit world, you forget, you're not aware of the for-profit, the business world. Where a key differential, I'll get back to this, but having been on numerous boards of directors for many years, in the nonprofit world, you come up with an idea, you write a grant, you submit the grant, you get the money, and then you do the work. But you get the money before you do the work, really. You have to do a little bit of the work of writing the grants. In the for-profit business world, you come up with an idea, you have to do the work, self-capitalize, and then you get paid for it. But one thing that is kind of different in that, like I know from my experience of having a business, is that, let's say, I'll just use a round number, that we made $100,000 last year doing our business. Pretty sure I'm gonna make somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000 next year. Like that work I already did is gonna roll over. Whereas in the nonprofit world, there is this unfortunate thing that's highly susceptible to changes in the political climate, that you have to write those grants all over again. And there's no guarantee that you're gonna be given the budget that you had last year. Whereas when I look at over the last 16 years of doing Siskiyou Seeds, our gross revenue has generally trended upwards. There's some jagged lines due to various forces, but generally speaking, it's an upward angling thing that's like 20% a year in increase. So back to this list, but it's important because sometimes through the nonprofit lens, you look at reality in this way, and then those of us in the business, private sector world look at it differently because of that delineation that I shared. In terms of one, you have to do the work and then you get the money, the other, you do the work. I mean, you get the money and then you do the work. And then you have to prove that you did the work that justifies the money with the hopes that you might get funding again. But we're seeing that is increasingly uncertain. So back to this list, we share resources, so like for me, for instance, one example would be I grow seeds of winter squash. I don't need the squash. If, let's say the Jefferson Farm Kitchen or something else, some other business needed, I literally have probably 2,000 pounds of squash a year. Organic, we could, wash our hands and, use clean, vessels and then have bins. We used to bring it to the food bank in Josephine County, but now they want to cut it open themselves. And I'm like, I'm not gonna let you do that because you're gonna slice right through all the seeds that are the important thing I do. Where we use a mallet, we crack the squash so we don't break the seeds. But that's an example. Like also I have a walk-in cooler and we have an extensive orchard. We use that walk-in cooler August through, now-ish. The rest of the year is just sitting there empty. Somebody else wanted to rent it for me? No problem, it's already there. I have a whole walk-in cooler. So what if we did an assessment of the needs and potential offerings of local businesses to avoid, because building a walk-in cooler is going to cost you 10 or 20 grand. So a new business may not be able to afford that. So borrow one to get started and then realize, oh, we totally need this, or we only need one that's about half this size. Those kind of things.
Yeah.
Coordinate events that showcase local businesses. I would say AGA is already totally doing this with the holiday fair, Jackson Affine, various things like this, but we could possibly be doing more to these ends. The farmers markets obviously showcase local businesses. Patronize other member businesses and leave Google and Yelp reviews. This is something I don't think that we're doing enough of, and I know I try and do that. I try and shop at every store. So when we're done here, I'm gonna head over to the station, buy a few things. I also occasionally shop at the Pro Bolt store. I stop at 3 stores in Williams, and I stop at the Roosh one periodically. Because I'm kind of curious, what do they have? Are they doing, do they have any local things? They've got local cheese, bread, other things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we could be boosting our the Google and Yelp reviews and just helping boost one another in the algorithms.
Yep.
And that could be something that okay, you want to be a member of the Chamber of Commerce, you need to leave 5 reviews. And then we ask for that, and then you'll get that too. It's a little pyramid schemey, maybe, but.
No, but it's for real. When you
Yeah.
go onto if I go onto a site, and this was with a local business that attended the last
Mhm.
session, and they were talking about their social media. I went on their site and there hadn't been a review in 6 months. And if I see a place where there hasn't been a review in quite a long time, I always wonder, have things tailed off?
Mhm.
What's their current status? So keeping reviews current is really important.
Yeah. And a case in point, just on Saturday, I went up to the Umpqua Hot Springs with a friend that was visiting from out of town. But I wasn't quite sure what the status was as the road opened, so I went to the website and looked at all the things. I looked at all trails. And everything I saw said, no, it's going to be closed after dark. The gate may be closed after mid-November. Kind of all these things that if I wasn't a local, I would have been dissuaded. We're not going to do that. But I've lived here for almost 30 years. Been going to that spot for 35 years. I'm like, it'll be fine. The parking lot, we got there right at nightfall, was completely packed. And we actually had to wait to, for one, I don't know, those of you that have been there, one of our local hot springs, we had to wait a little while for one of the pools to open up. And there was some rowdy young people that were loud and drinking. And so now my due diligence is to go back on all trails and leave a objective review and just share like, hey, here was my experience. So that somebody else coming along is benefited from that because they can look like, oh, mid-November, that's recent. So little things like that. This one down here, I'll read it out because it's a lot of words. Share in business service providers costs such as marketing, bookkeeping, etc. to incentivize, this actually should be a second one, sorry. So I'll just stop and explain that one. And that's one that my friend Richard Ziff out in Williams, he and his wife started the first organic hemp clothing company in the world 25 years ago. And he and I have been riffing off that because every small business that has employees needs somebody to run payroll. So we use Gusto, you need a graphic artist, web design, bookkeeping, just run down the list. There's like a dozen different services. But a small business, you can't necessarily afford, that for each thing. So what if in joining the AGA, business network, at different price tiers, it gains you access to that we have a retainer, and I don't know if you have time, but I'll just use you as an example as somebody that has web design skills. And where you're gonna say, well, I can set aside 5 hours a month or whatever for consulting for that, so that you have access to those things, rather than there's too many things to have to learn to figure out. I remember I was naive when I was younger. I was like, I'm gonna learn Photoshop. And I got into it and I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just gonna pay somebody else that's already figured it out. And whether AGA is actually providing it or maybe just providing a list of service providers that are local to keep those resources local instead of going to Grants Pass, Medford, and exporting our dollars. Where I see it, my vision, where I'd love to see it, is we've been looking at possibly moving the AGA offices from where it is at the Sunshine Plaza. We have one offer to possibly move to Longsword Vineyard. But I was like, what if we could have a building about this size that's like office space, like co-working space, but also maybe there's another room, a podcast studio, that also is capable with all the gear to do online courses. You're doing
Kitchen.
Teaching, and
No,
then
I
getting
said
that
the kitchen.
online. Yeah, our kitchen.
So, in 1990, we started this at Roost, at, community center / library it was called, just before the library had gone and things went on. And our dream was so enormous, and it just kept growing and growing and growing, and together, we had $312 or something, this wasn't really gonna happen, but we were really, really working on it, and yeah, we need a lot, and this place really does need office space and a kitchen and, and an auditorium and, everything, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of grows out of proportion to our capabilities, I think.
And some of these resources already exist, whether it's at the Rouge Fire Station or, I remember talking with.
Or at the library.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or at the
they're all new,
library.
they're all new.
Pacifica, the Granges,
Yeah.
even in Williams, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I never knew, they run a free store that's one day a week and they do a free meal afterwards on Tuesdays. They have a whole recreation room with pool tables and ping pong that they created years and years ago, hoping to provide a place for the teens to hang out.
Mm-hmm.
And it just sits empty all the time. So there's a lot of resources like this in the community. And again, how do we synergize all that kind of stuff? This one should be its own separate line, but is to incentivize ecological practices that support a thriving watershed. So something about, I've always, my elevator speech for AGA is like, well, we're like the Regenerative Chamber of Commerce and the Homeowners Association. We're not charging dues, but I wish we could. But let's say you're burning plastic trash in your yard, and it's like, no, you don't get to participate in the things. Like whether it's I think I prefer a carrot approach than a stick approach. But again, how do we boost the exposure and patronage of those that are conducting themselves as individual land stewards or businesses in the area that are improving the quality of life for those who live here currently and the future, whether they're human or otherwise. And that's, obviously that's nuanced. Some people are going to say that's political, but I was just listening to something about the one of my favorite podcasts is called The Fall of Ancient Civilizations. And it's a guy that's a history professor at Oxford, does these like 4-hour deep dives with voice actors and all this. And so it's a deep dive down to the Persian Empire, which was actually these disparate areas that eventually came together. And this was about 500 BC, to put it in context. And I wasn't really that familiar with the Zoroastrian religion that predates Islam by quite a bit. But one of the things in the Zoroastrian was a deep appreciation for rivers. You couldn't even wash your hand in a river. Definitely not like relieving yourself or polluting it. There was just an understanding the river was the lifeblood and the health and the spiritual health of the whole community. And that was an understanding 2,500 years ago. And here we are still trying to figure out how to do that. And we don't have everybody on board. So whether that's we're partnering with Ducks Unlimited or OWEB, Oregon Water Enhancement Board, there's already a lot of things going with the Watershed Council, but just that idea of reverence for that ineffable feeling that everyone that comes here, whether it's a whole squad of Harleys coming through the area, they're coming here because it's beautiful. They're not riding, that new highway that goes from like Crater Lake Avenue up that way, because it's out through an industrial part. They want to come out here, and that's because it's beautiful, because the vast majority of the people are uplifting the ecological qualities of the ecoregion. And then this last one is, I've been mulling this over and I want to learn more about it. I just started to look at what are the alternatives to Venmo, PayPal, all that, Cash App, is to develop a local currency that helps avoid the 3% bank tax of digital transactions. Possibly a blockchain-supported app akin to Venmo or PayPal that incentivizes patronizing local businesses. So if you think about it, like when we do that Wednesday Applegate market, we along with other vendors, when we are selling there, we've got a card reader. Every purchase, so let's say our profit margin is 15%. I'm just gonna grab a random number, which is about accurate for what we do between the farmers markets and our seed business. But if every transaction that we do, we're losing 3%, that's a significant element. That's 1/5 of our profit margin that's eaten up the banks each time. But then we use the money we make and we go to the station or whatever, one of the stores, and then they lose 3%. And so in that idea of I've been really curious about monetary policy over the last few years, and there's 2 types of money. One's called M1 money and the other's called M2. M1 money is the total dollars in in circulation. I think globally right now we're at like $320 trillion in circulation. It's higher than it's ever been because all the central banks are just printing money like out of thin air. M2 money supply represents the velocity of transactions. And so this is the idea of dollar turnover. So if everybody that goes to the Wednesday Applegate market and purchases there, then all those vendors, let's say some of them go over to the Outlaw Cider place and have a drink and a meal there. And then let's say the Applegate Outlaw people are sourcing from local businesses. Right. And we're getting gas at things. And that's where I tend to think, people complain about like, well, I'll just pick on the Williams General Store. People pick on the price, oh, that's so expensive. But I'm like, but you didn't have to drive all the way to Medford. And I'm so glad they're there. I'm not gonna do all my shopping there, but I'll go down, I'll get eggs and bread and half and some basic things there because I want them to stay there. And that's keeping the money in the community. So if, let's say I make $100 at the Applegate market and then I spend that $100 in the community, it just became $200 actually. And then if those people where I spent the money re-spend that money, it amplifies. So one of my mentors and inspirational figures I tend to look at, his name is Douglas Rushkoff, and he's written a number of books. He's got a podcast called Team Human, and he has a book by the same name. His previous book was called Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, to give you a little idea of his, where he stands. His latest one is called Survival of the Richest, which is how the billionaires are building bunkers in like New Zealand or wherever to avoid when, the whatever bird comes to homes to roost. Anyhow, he pointed out, he's like, we need a midpoint between capitalism, because we see that doesn't work with the current structure of capitalism, which is pretty much maximizing the profits for the shareholders. That is the number one goal for most corporations in the US. And Marxism, which we can look to history and see that generally doesn't work, even though I witness a lot of younger people advocating that we try. They just need to study some history to realize you might not want to do that. So what is the midpoint between those two? And Douglas Rushkoff, he uses the term distributism. Is really what we want to do is, back to that M2 money supply, encourage the velocity of transactions. We want more money churning through the system, just like air. Air, like, I can hoard food, I can hoard water, I can hoard gold, but I can't hoard air. It's dumb. Like, you can hold your breath, but that's something that needs to be exchanged, and you're ultimately exchanging it with plants and the mushrooms. So thinking of money more in that terms, of like, it's more about how is it moving in the community. And it's really easy to conceptualize, but I don't think we have many examples that showcase this in a really beautiful fashion, except for perhaps the Mondragon Cooperative. Anybody familiar with that? In the Basque region of Spain. There's a good BBC documentary from 1983, so it's a bit dated. But they're still in practice. It was started in the 50s by a Catholic priest. And so it's in the Basque region of Spain. They don't really see themselves as Spanish. They see themselves as Basque. They have their own language and cultural identity. So I think it's a little unique, but I would say us Applegaters have our own cultural identity. So, but as of 1983, they had 80,000 members of their cooperative. They ran about 100 factories making bicycles, cooking stove, refrigerators, the kind of things people need. They had complete vocational education system, kindergarten all the way through. Starting in middle school, you spent half your day in the classroom, half your day actually doing something like soldering circuit boards, building bicycles, of which you got paid for that time. And then as you got to your later years of whatever they would call high school, you met with a business development incubator team, and they had their own banking system. And they were like, oh, that's a great idea. We'll fund this, but we're gonna have you work with this team of engineers to design and hone your business, and then we'll completely support it because we want it to be successful, because we're investing in you, and we want our investment to thrive. They also have their own social security system. That would be pretty nifty if we could begin to develop some of those things. And there's a lot of models out there, and I would love to see kind of more of a think tank, and maybe AGA is becoming that in our board, and we've been talking about bringing in an advisory board that meets less frequently, of mainly elders in the community. Like, you shared this story of things that happened.
What?
Yeah. And I know when I first started coming around here, like the Rouge store was like the hub of all this stuff. Way back, and because there wasn't really natural foods available. So I'm intrigued by those kind of ideas of how can we really be a model, and there's a lot of models out there. And to quote Buckminster Fuller, is he one of my favorite quotes from him is that we were not destined to be the victims of the future, but more its architects. And I think there's a lot more, especially younger people, that are going this nihilistic route of seeing themselves as the victims of the current situation, where really it's like, well, come up with a better idea. And Cornell, they had a whole like healthcare co-op I saw. You kick in like $100 a year, like kind of a nominal fee, and it creates this pool that's in an account, an interest-bearing account. And then when you need dental work, you're like, hey, I've been chipping in, I'm gonna need some dental work. Or you need something, but we don't all need it all at the same time. But look at the way the insurance guys are doing it. They're just gaming the system. AIG got bailed out, what, $700 billion? I mean, it's insane. Why don't we pool that money? So back to that idea of we're not gonna change anything until we change the way money works. So what if we had this, an app on your phone? So I'm at the market and I'm getting some goat cheese or whatever, and I tap the thing, and maybe it's still a 3% tax, and maybe 1% goes to the admin, like maybe back to AGA or whoever figures it out. The other 2% goes in a little kitty as a business incubator for young people. So when we're later looking for funding, that's all, we already have it. But currently it's the banks, and they invest in awful things. And I know you would be skirting the rules the bank set up to make it so you couldn't be a bank. But I know that it's entirely possible to figure out a way to do this, and I think it would be really cool. It's like the Cornell Health Co-op of just coming up with something. Or like for us, I'll just use the example that we and many other livestock producers do is, in order to sell meat, we either have to drive the animals up to Roseburg, which is the USDA certified slaughterhouse, and have the animals killed there, and then we can have it packaged somewhere else. Or we put out a little ad and say, hey, we sell whole or half lambs. You pay this much per pound hanging weight, and we throw in the kill, cut, and wrap for free, and you come pick up a box. But you bought a live animal. So there's tons of people that do that. So there's like these workarounds.
Yeah.
And just on Saturday, I have 2 lambs that 2 old friends are coming up, and they're buying live animals. And they're going to go home with a box of frozen meat and bones and organs. So this whole idea of like, how can we come up with these hacks, I think will really not only transform how we think of resources and exchange, but also then be an example. And that's one thing I think here in the Applegate, that we really are an example of a vibrant rural community that's looking at doing, anybody that comes to the Wednesday market here, or the Monday Williams market, or any events at Pacifica, or any number of locations, you can feel it's different. It's very different than going to like some washed up coastal Oregon, failed logging town. Or even, areas, outside Medford or Cape Junction or something like that. You can feel there's something going on because people ultimately are trying to do this, but we haven't done it under the big tent that's convening it. And I know for myself, I like being part of things where it's not mine. Like, I don't really want my name on it. It's like the R kind of thing. And that's really an idea of the regenerative thing, because each of us, this body is only here for so long. So we want institutions, concepts, ideas that will evolve into the future. So a few just stats around chambers of commerce. There's the Jacksonville, their mission is cultivating vibrant business in our historic landmark town. So that, obviously Jacksonville has its own thing. Their dues are $110 to $250 a year, so actually about consistent with the AGA Business Network. They have a staff of 2 and a board of 10. Grants Pass Chamber was $310 to $7,500, because obviously, and I think we should actually do that. Like Herb Farm, come on, kick in $5,000. Although I do know Sarah Katz did do that. And they have a staff of 6 and a board of 16, because obviously Grants Pass is much larger. You've got 40,000 people there, so they want representation. They have somebody from the library, somebody from the schools. They actually also represent nonprofits, to not just for-profits. The Ashland Chamber has a staff of 3 and a board of 18. Similar. I couldn't find out what their dues are because you had to actually apply, and that you had to say what your gross sales were, and I'm like, I'm not actually a client. Do you know?
I think we, as a nonprofit, I think we pay $400 a
Okay.
year. They have different rates for different kinds of
Yeah.
business.
Yeah. And in cities, like a Chamber of Commerce is actually considered part of the city, and most of them are a bit of a pay to play. Like if you pay, we're gonna hype your business.
Yeah.
If not, and that's where my analogy of the homeowners association is. Of you support the work we do because it's not free. To run AGA is not free, or to run, you're not volunteering here.
No, no, I am not.
Although I think encouraging volunteerism is an important thing as well for those of us who are on boards. The Ashland Chamber mission statement, I just put that up there, is organized to advance the welfare and prosperity of the city of Ashland, to preserve the competitive enterprise system, promote civic, commercial, industrial, tourism, and agricultural interests of the city, to create a more intelligent business and public opinion regarding city, county, state, and national legislative and political affairs, to promote prudent business practices, expansion, and community growth, and to promote and facilitate efficient and effective advertising services and benefits for its members. Ironically, the Ashland one doesn't mention anything about the ecological, natural beauty of why most people go to Ashland, which is kind of surprising. And then they even take credit for the agriculture. Like there's pretty much no agriculture in the city limits of Ashland. And those of you that are familiar with Ashland politics know it's a very divisive thing. I know that DeBoer family is actually, Lithium Motors is among the Fortune 500 companies. A lot of people don't know quite how wealthy the DeBoer family is.
About 30 years ago, the mayor, I was at a party in Ashland, and the mayor was there, and he said that every single person in Ashland has given something up to be there, whether it's land or a bigger amount of money, or a whole corporate life or whatever. Everybody really wanted to be there. They're driven to be there, and that is a huge uniting influence.
Yeah.
So,
And that's-
and it was
Same
like
for the Applegate.
it was like
Yeah.
that here once too. Before then there was a new incentive
Mhm.
until the new cannabis incentive. But
Yeah.
that's the way it was before here too. Everybody had a really vested interest in wanting to be here,
Yeah.
wanting to drive on country roads like you should drive on country roads and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's
And,
fine.
all the schools, the churches, so many of the community organizations, the libraries, all depend on volunteerism and donations. And I think that's still true to this day, whether it's a bake sale or whatever it is. And that civic mindedness, I'd like to see us, how do we articulate that in an inviting way for that like homeowners association thing, for people to see that. I know like most people that participate in religious community tithe in some way, whether it's their time or their financial resources. So I thought that was just useful to kind of get a little like, what are other people doing, And especially to go back to this of like, the Applegate too is becoming this whole tourist thing, but we don't really have an advocacy group except for what AGA is doing, and I would say the Ventures Association a bit as well.
Mhm.
And I think there's room for improvement. So I'm going to bring it back this slide just to like look at these kind of bubble diagrams of like looking at holistic whole culture involves all these elements into a concerted whole as a community, and then as an individual doing a business. I'm going to end with this slide and some of these things that I just feel like I know for myself I have to keep drilling it in, but it's the Japanese term ikigai. So it's this Venn diagram of, I'll just read through it: what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and then what you're good at. A lot of us will settle for just 2 or 3 of these circles.
That's what I thought Ikigai was the green and the yellow.
But where you get to that
I didn't know
overlap
it's
of
there.
all those things is that sweet spot. And really what we want to see happening is, particularly for our young people who go through the school system. Imagine if you could go, if you're part of any of the schools in the Applegate, go to an AGA job fair. That would be so cool. And I know like most Chamber of Commerces around in bigger cities include ROTC and our various armed forces because that represents an economic pathway for some people to, you know.
So many years ago, there was one at Applegate School that this very vivacious woman organized with only local people. And it was, every room in the building was taken up, the hallways were taken up, and there must have been 40 or 50 different occupations there, a beekeeper and just all kinds of people. It was really, really interesting. And I mean, this was gonna have to happen every year. Everyone felt that way about it, and then she moved. And so, but it was very thrilling, and things you don't even think of as professions, a lot of them. So yeah, it was pretty, like, you know, I do the beavers, you know, at the park. That's my job. Really, you know, I just think that's just interesting to learn that sort of thing. So
yeah, and it could be, you know, a project for AGA, you know, coming up next year is a job fair of some sort. Or I saw a little thing, I think it came out of Japan, you know, we've got like seed libraries, tool libraries, these kind of things. It was a wisdom library. And so they'd organize a thing where there were all these people that held wisdom. And I remember one was like a Zen Buddhist monk. And you could go rent them by sitting with them and having tea for a half hour and get wisdom. And, you know, kind of back to this idea of like a business services thing, like if we had that co-working station, like the Hive in Grants Pass, I know there's one in Ashland. Like I would donate a certain amount of time to have office hours, just be like, come in, here's my office hours, and I'll just chat with whoever comes in.
That's what SCORE wants to be, is retired business owners advising younger folks.
Yeah.
It's lost funding right now.
who is that?
SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives,
Oh.
so they've lost their funding from the Fed, so they're going through a big reorg right now, but the idea is experienced business owners mentoring new business owners.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of value in that. I'll just close with, I started a men's group more around like community preparedness, and we started an adjunct group we call the Wealth Circle. We all read this book called The Richest Man in Babylon. It was written in 1910. And it was, you know, but about Babylon, which is, you know, 2,500 years ago that I started off talking about ancient Persia. And many of the ways money works and the advice in that is really similar. That, you know, and it's most simply pay yourself first and then save 10% of everything you make and save it. And, you know, just these ideas that wisdom from 2,500 years ago still applies to today, even though we can get young people like, oh, it's different. You could be, you know, a social media influencer, AI is going to change all that. But I do think this idea of like, you know, the wisdom of people that have been here for a long time is a very much an untapped resource. Like if we put a number on that, like we're talking about ecosystem services, that is a huge storehouse of wealth that is currently not really being used by and large. So maybe we'll just take a few questions or comments and close.
Well, my comment is that being new to the area, relatively new, and kind of raring to go. This is my husband and my like swan song, third act, whatever you want to call it. And we're both, he's semi-retired, I'm completely retired. But we both want to offer to the community sort of a STEM advocacy knowledge. I taught at Cal Poly for years using art to teach STEM. So like third grade kids that on the STAR test maybe didn't do so well. You can use origami in third grade, and it's that hands-on project-based learning. Now my husband works in aerospace. So the two of us were like, well, what can we do here? We couldn't find a place to go to offer that. So I think that would, like what you're saying, kind of this bank would be
Knowledge
great.
bank.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not that I want to be a wise elder yet, but elder I've got down.
Yeah, I love the overall vision. I'm ready to sign up. So I'm just curious what's holding us back from the next steps, because I could see a lot of people is going to agree that this is a great vision. So, I mean, is there a petition I could sign or?
Well, I think you know, when I joined the board at AGA, I had my own idea of what it should be, and I would, you know, came in raring to go, because I've always been a bit of a self-starter, and Megan was like, whoa, like we applied for these grants 2 years ago, and then we got them, and now we have to do them. Just understanding the life cycle.
Yeah.
And so now she's asking, like, I would really like you to write up, like, basically what I just presented, so that we can incorporate that for future funding. The So Ready and these various other groups that want to see rural economic renewal and, you know, value added. So there's room for it, but it just takes getting the people good with the spreadsheets and the wordsmithing.
When you were talking about the freezer that is unoccupied 8 months of the year, there's a concept called asset-based community development. Have you ever run into it?
I haven't heard that.
Anybody here? It was developed by a guy, and he was working. ABCD.
Yeah.
He was working with poor communities, and what he noticed was a lot of times the emphasis was on what they lacked. You don't have this, you don't have that, and it can turn into sort of a self-fulfilling, well, gee, you have so little. And he turned it around and started looking at the assets that communities do have and what they could develop internally, kind of like some of your emphasis, and had a lot of success doing that. And it empowered people, instead of making people feel like, gee, we're poor and pathetic and have nothing and we're doomed.
Yeah.
They started looking at, we look at the wisdom and the skills and the assets that we do have here. What can we do with that? Just a different perspective, a different approach,
Yeah.
and a productive one.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Like, I've got like half a dozen mature hawthorn trees loaded with fruit. There's all kind of herbalists that don't own land. So you're reminding me, like, I should put it out there on Applegate Connect
Or listserv.
yeah, one of the things. I'm just like, I don't even need any money for it. It would just be nice to see it get used.
Yep.
So, but anyone else? How about you? You're new to this.
I am new, but I don't have any
Okay,
questions.
yeah. I mean, I have faith that like within AGA, that will just keep evolving into, you know, new programming, new ideas. Hopefully, some iteration of this work going forward.
Yep.
Yeah, just ongoing. You got anything to close it out, Rosalind?
No. Off the top of my head.
Well, I would like to thank you for putting this program together and getting it into this library.
You're welcome, you're welcome.
Yep.
It was an idea that I stole from urban libraries. Big cities like Toronto have entrepreneurs and residents, and the more I learned about it, the more I thought, we could do that. And it's a lot, and you know, quite a bit of it was, you know, we have unique experience here and unique skills, let's highlight that rather than try to bring in some expert from somewhere else. And that part has paid off in spades. Yeah. So I really like that. I sometimes, you know, I think, you know, it's just a few people in every class, but you know, I've thrown the rock in the pond, now I get to see the ripples. That's the fun part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And please call me if you're interested in looking up any of these concepts. And we do have Douglas Rushkoff books in the library.
Oh, great.
Yeah, thanks.
And the reason I've been recording these is to put on the AGA
Yeah.
YouTube
Nice.
channel. So I just today had the thought that maybe I can convince my elder son to edit down some highlight reel stuff too, that could be useful for AGA social media, but also like a best of clips with, you know, some of the more salient pieces. So
Yeah.
hopefully we can do that.
Well, and a few reels to put on Instagram to lead people back
Yeah.
to the channel.
Because I get it, this is dinner time on a Monday night. It's
Yeah.
not exactly, but we all have phones.
So the Business Network is having a gathering at the Lindsay Lodge on Thursday, December 11th. And I think it's 5 to 7 or 5 to 7:30. And you're all welcome.